So we have 6 talking points from the week's topics, essentially, and we begin with the Japanese world domination. Dave, it's not a new phenomenon, but it is evolving over time. They went from having 5 winners at last year's Dubai Carnival to having 2 of last night's most significant. Is this something we can just expect?
I think you can now, and I think what's changing, it was a 1, 2, 3 in the UAE Derby, the winner going now to the Kentucky Derby, and the route there, they're having big winners on turf, on dirt, at different age groups, the 3-year-olds showing up, the older horses.
And at all distances,
yeah.
on all surfaces.
I mean, the one anomaly last year was the Breeders' Cup. They didn't turn up at the Breeders' Cup last year. I think they had one runner in the sprint that was a big prize. California already. Equinox already been talked about the Breeders' Cup turf because the ground will be right and he's going to be pointed there. But it's this emergence, this world power, and people I know grow tired of us pointing out that their breeding operation, they're looking to breed top quality, sound, middle distance stock.
They shouldn't grow tired of us pointing it out because we still haven't woken up to the fact that we should be doing what they're doing, which is what our European counterparts were doing generations ago, Arthur Moore. When Vincent O'Brien went to America and brought back the Northern Dancer line and the Sadler's Wells, that's why we were as good as we were. But that seems to be what's been adopted in Japan now.
Looks like it, doesn't it? Like the Sunday Silence line has been massive to them.
Their 2 winners yesterday was great-grandsons of Sunday Silence.
Yeah. So, yes, we could do a bit more class middle distance.
They're not afraid of 1.5 mile plus 2 mile horses, whereas we seem to be allergic to them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's no problem to them. The deep impact, I think, 1 over 2 miles, isn't it? And, it doesn't take away from the class.
Hopefully our, we're kind of being propped up by our major owner breeders here with Juddmonte and Darley and Coolmore doing that. So I hope that we can make these middle distance horses more commercially attractive so that we can, promote them here in Europe and not suffer.
It's good that the Frankens are staying.
Yes, exactly, yeah. That moves us on to George Boughey's comments earlier this week that his operation in Britain would be essentially used as a base for global international races, that he cited the state of British racing as worrying, Dave. I think there's a lot of people would echo those sentiments.
Yeah, that was fascinating coming from George, who was like one of the young rising stars. I mean, Horses in Training was published this week. I think he's got about 170 horses in training now. He's one of the...
he won last year's Guineas. He's one of the emerging talents.
One of the emerging talents, and he's now thinking that the future for his better horses lies overseas. He's going after the money abroad. He said in the past there have been interesting winners, creating the winners to create his own reputation here. Now it's prize money, and if he can race for £200,000 abroad, why would he race for £20,000 domestically? And I thought what was a really interesting aspect of the interview was he talked about the different mentality of owners now. And you do see that they're looking to sell horses at their peak value, and why wouldn't they? That all of a sudden you get a horse rated 90, 100 that's a 10 furlong horse that appeal to the Hong Kong market, that could appeal, a stayer that might appeal to Australia. The incentive to race on over here now is much, much diminished. The money that's available now to send them overseas to be bought by powerful overseas connections, it's almost it's a trading system now that you hit a certain handicap mark with a certain type of horse and the offers are coming in. You pass a battery test to go to Hong Kong. There aren't many owners around, including some of the big ones, who can turn their money down now.
Yeah, and look, Arthur, the sad state of that is if you look at it from that perspective, we essentially become a nursery for global.
Like the money these horses are making is astronomical.
It's hard to justify turning it down, isn't it?
Well, one can understand, George, because the racing world has become so much smaller, and it's not a big deal now to travel to America, especially to go for some of those races. I know Australia's a long way, but still, Hong Kong, it's very much a possibility.
It's become more efficient for sure, and he was out of luck yesterday with El Dassim, but I'm sure that he will have plenty more global success in the future. He's particularly targeting next year's Dubai World Cup Carnival. The Derby is going to be run possibly a little bit earlier this year, Dave. Why?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's the front page of the Racing Post this morning that the FA Cup final unusually clashes with the Derby. So we're now trying to find a slot. We don't know what time the FA Cup final kicks off. And I think that's obviously going to impact on what time the Derby goes. The Derby's been 4:30 for the last few years. It won't be, seemingly, this time around. It's going to get brought forward. It's an enhanced card. There's an extra race on the Derby Day this year. There's a new 0 to 90 handicap on there. So there's 8 races to slot in. They're going to work with RMG, work with ITV to find the premium slot. I mean, you could potentially look at it as a positive. There's potentially a massive sports audience that Saturday consuming their sport, and if the Derby can find a slot to get an increased audience to it, then wonderful. But the counter-argument is this is our most prestigious horse race. This is the classic, the mile and a half. And we're now talking in March. We don't know what time it's going to be run on the first Saturday in June. That's slightly alarming. We haven't got a sponsor for it yet.
That's probably more alarming.
And this weight that we have, the blue chip sponsors that we hope are waiting in the wings. I know these are difficult times, the financial markets, everything that's going on, but we still don't seem to be able to attract these big players, these big money people to our most prestigious events. And it would be frightening. I don't think it would happen, touch wood, I think that is wood, touch whatever that is, that we get someone in place by the Derby comes around, but it's going to be late in the day now.
Yeah, look, that sponsorship issue is huge, and I'm sure Epsom are working tirelessly to get a flagship sponsor. But it's not unusual, it's not unprecedented for the time of the race to be moved. I think it was 2009, the Derby was run at 3:45 to accommodate I think of it as some memorial, and then we actually think that the 2,000 guineas on May 9th, is it? Or May 6th is going to be brought forward or later for the King's coronation?
Yeah, they're going to move the time for that as well. So yeah,
yet to be specified, but yeah.
Yeah, it has happened in the past, I'm sure, for most people. But it's just such a great day, Derby Days, and it's one of the wonderful days on the sporting calendar, and what time the Derby runs ultimately won't matter. People on the Downs will still thoroughly enjoy it. If we could hit a huge TV audience off the back of it, then all the better.
We just want it on mainstream television, basically. The next one is a more positive note. Increase in prize money. A lot of announcements this week, a lot of positive news, particularly from York and Hamilton. Yeah,
really encouraging news, because we all know the financial headwinds that the sport's facing, particularly in Britain right now. We've got still haven't seen the gambling white paper published and the affordability checks and the threats that potentially might pose to the levy income. But York and Hamilton have announced increased prize money for this season, significantly increased. I mean, at York, there's no race run for less than 20,000 prize money pot this season. For the EBA meeting, nothing less than 100,000. It's all from an executive contribution because of the levy income for York's down from 2022. Yeah. But it's off the back of, as you say, Hamilton. We've seen Newbury announcing it, Goodwood announced it, Jockey Club Racecourses have announced it. I think there's that realisation now that something needs to be done, and that when they're looking at where they're investing their money now, prize money increasingly. And it all ties into the conversation we've had, the George Boughey conversation that we had.
It needs to happen.
Something's got to happen. We have got to be offer owners more.
Good prize money brings good racing, brings good crowds.
It's a cyclical situation, and we know that needs to be addressed. In Ireland, Goffs have announced a €2 million series, so they had their Goffs Million last year, but they've now propped it up. They've got this supporting race, which is a €500,000 race, and they're going to have 10 two-year-old maidens worth 50 grand. That must be a serious contribution.
Yeah. I mean, again, look at English owners. They'd probably have to bring the horses over to go for
well, that's the thing. So if you have a Goffs graduate, whether sportsman's or RV in the UK, they can come and do what Tom Dascombe did when he won the Ballyhane at Naas, or
even for a maiden for 50 grand.
They can come for our maidens and take.
I'm sure they will. I mean, people like Richard Fahey have brought horses over for the sales races, and
well, you have group races run for less than that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, why wouldn't if you qualify? It's like the French premium that they can qualify for races over there as well. They're an added incentive to go chasing prize money. And when you talk about the money in the maidens, let alone the sales races, then trouble is they're very hard to win, the maidens. That's the one problem.
Well, as Arthur said, you've got the prize money, you're going to have better competition, and we're all going to watch it and go racing to see it. So that's the aim. In Ireland, there's been a lot of talk about the bumpers recently, and I think Jonathan Pearson wrote a very interesting piece in the Racing Post during the week, Arthur, talking about the domination of the two major stables. Gordon Elliott and Willie Mullins. Not their fault, by the way. Would just like to point that out before we start. But it's becoming increasingly difficult for anybody other than those guys to win bumpers in Ireland.
It is. They've so many horses, and they have to find races for them before they go into their maiden novice hurdle season. And so they have to run them in bumpers, and you often get Willie run two, and Gordon as well in bumpers. So it's very off-putting for other people. They probably decide, what's the point in going for a bumper? Just go straight hurdling.
Yeah, I know. Sure, I used to be running up behind a lot of them myself. I think, Dave, between the period of 2018 and 2022, they won 38%, but never more than 44% in any particular year. But this year, they won 74% of the bumpers, 3/4. That's incredible.
That's absolutely, and I don't know what the percentage of the others that they had runners in. I presume, I mean, that would be...
But they'd have a runner in almost every
just everything
race.
That's, But you look at the championship bomber, we work with Willie's one of our columnists, we work with Patrick. They had 10 runners, 7 of the first 10 home, and Patrick was saying that some of those were some of the better ones that hadn't made the trip across.
Right.
You go to the sales after racing at Cheltenham, and Gordon goes to 420,000 for the 2 point-to-point winners. I mean, there was one British horse in the first 10 in the bumper, finished third for Paul Nicholls.
And that reflects the future.
It does. That's next year's novice hurdlers. I mean, Willie had a 1, 2, 3 in the Triumph, the Ballymore, 3 of the first 4 in the Supreme. This bumper team next year segues into the novice hurdles, and
it's pretty scary for an English trainer, isn't it?
It's intimidating, even for your fellow Irish trainers to try and beat them next year or have something worthy of taking them on.
Sure.
Yeah, it's as I said. Often, somebody asked me before, I think it might have been Prunella Dobbs, she said, we'd just won a bumper, a lovely mare of hers. She said, where will I go, maiden hurdle or winner's bumper? I said, go maiden hurdle. And she said, why, who wins winner's bumpers? I said, Willie Mullins. And she did, and she won her maiden hurdle. Right. The last topic of conversation on our list today is, came through during the week, an interesting piece by Emma Berry in this week's TDN about French mares who are covered, no longer being allowed to race in France for a period of time. Arthur, tell us more.
This is bizarre. It came in as a rule on the 1st of March, and it appears that the owners, trainers, breeders were not made aware of this at all, and it's to do with welfare, and I believe France Gallup are very sort of sensitive to any bad publicity, and a small group in social media apparently started. Well, in a race card in France, there's a small red heart beside any mare that's in covered or in foal, and that for starters maybe got people wondering what's that all about. And then, well, why do you run mares with ignorance? When they're in foal. In fact, up to 120 days, there's absolutely no issue whatsoever, and longer. Like the fetus is only with 4 grams weight at that stage, but the France Gallup, the committee, the stewards, the president, they seem to have fallen to the publicity. They're very sensitive to bad publicity, and so therefore they just brought this in behind the back of everybody, and a very extraordinary time as well, because there's mares already covered. In the middle
of the breeding season. Yeah,
exactly. So it looks like it's in, and it's going to be hard to turn around.
But the breeders feel aggrieved. There was no communication with them, it seems.
That's right.
They're only talking after the decision is made. Is there any way that the TVA or the European Breeders' Fund can pressurise us to reverse the decision?
Well, normally the English, French and Irish all sing off the same hymn sheet, but in this case, I think the French, they did it with whips as well. They've gone out on their own. Interesting.
I don't think we've seen the last of that chapter, if I'm honest, and I'm sure the discussion will continue, but that was this week's Talking Points.
Subscribe to Racing TV's YouTube channel now to watch more great races like this.